Good day again. Is being competitive or competition, is that a good thing in the Christian life? And in this video, I'm going to look at competition, being competitive, is that a good thing? And then later, I'm going to look at what we were meant to be and tie those two together. So, competition, being competitive, is that a good thing? You know, competition, it's something that's every aspect of our life. Whether we play a sport or whether we run a business, whether we're in education or whether we're going to school, whether we're in politics, competition has a part in all of our lives, particularly in the Western world that I live in today. But you know, the Bible has a fair bit to say about being competitive or competition. So there's just a few things I want to illustrate or highlight from a biblical perspective about competition. Now, firstly, competition can be both healthy and unhealthy. And the Bible is quite happy to acknowledge that competition is both unhealthy or healthy and unhealthy at the same time. You know, in healthy competition, whether that's individually or in groups, there's plenty of times when people strive to improve their performance without seeking to harm other people or disadvantage other people. And this competition we find in many aspects of life: sport, academic settings, many other settings of life. And we can, I'm sure if we look at ourselves, if we look long and hard enough, we can see how maybe locally where we are, or even in the history books of the last 200 years or even more, healthy competition has definitely inspired people to work harder, strive for excellence, and achieve the goals that they set out to do. At the same time, the Bible, it talks about, well, it warns us against unhealthy competition, which is not fueled by empowering other people or serving other people. It's actually fueled by envy, pride, and a desire for power and control. And this unhealthy competition, it's also often characterized by a win-at-all-costs mentality. And once we get into that realm, well, other people's well-being and the dignity of others eventually gets compromised or even ignored or violated. And this kind of competition can lead to division, conflict, division, and even violence. I mean, there's been even wars fought on, two countries being competitive against each other. But, you know, in the Bible, very early on, we see a very simple example in the story of Cain and Abel in Genesis chapter 4. So four chapters into the Bible, we see an example of unhealthy competition. So two brothers, Cain and Abel. Cain became jealous of Abel's offering to God, and as a result, Cain killed his brother Abel. He killed him out of envy. And when God eventually confronted Cain, all Cain could do was, he said, "I'm not my brother's keeper." So, you know, unhealthy competition can lead to, when driven by unhealthy and wrong motives, can lead to destructive outcomes, even fatal outcomes. But us as Christians, together, we're called as individuals to individual things by God, but together we are called to compete against sin and evil. When we put ourselves in God's hands, God calls us together to compete against sin and evil. Now, while the Bible warns us against unhealthy competition like Cain and Abel, it also encourages Christians to engage in this different form of competition in the struggle against sin and evil. And this form of competition is not against other people, but it's against the forces of darkness that seek to oppose God. Not just God's will, but it seeks to harm those of us who follow him. You know, the Apostle Paul, he illustrated this best in 1 Corinthians chapter 9, 4 and 20, verse 25 and 24 and 25. And he said, "Do you not know that in a race all the runners run, but only one gets the prize? Run in such a way to get the prize. Everyone who competes in the games goes into strict training. They do it to get a crown that will not last, but we do it to get a crown that will last forever." So Paul was illustrating a runner in the ancient Olympic Games there, going into strict training and getting a prize for coming first, being the victor. And what God's saying through the Apostle Paul there is that we can all together prepare ourselves for that day, for that journey where we run the race, and we have an opportunity for everybody to win. And it kind of describes the Christian life, because in the end of the Christian life, the prize is eternal life with God. Now, I've said before that in order to become a Christian, the price that has been paid by Jesus when he died on the cross, which we celebrate at Easter, and he died as a sacrifice for the sin of all people. And when we acknowledge that we've sinned and ask Jesus into our hearts, and we follow God from that day forward, then we have the promise of eternal life. But what does that mean with all this competition? Well, if you bought a magazine from the newsagent, or even some websites, the cover price of the Christian life is zero, but the subscription rate is everything. Because when we run the race, we're running that journey with God, following him, and every day we prepare to maintain that relationship with him. And it takes self-discipline, perseverance, and a commitment to live a righteous and holy life that maintains this prize that God's Son Jesus has paid a price for. Now, this is a worthy endeavour, because Paul wrote in another letter to the church in Ephesians, he says this: "For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms." So, for us to engage in competition, it's not about waging war against other people. It's about waging war against the spiritual forces that oppose God, that seek to harm us and lead our friends astray, and even us astray. But as Christians, we're called to put on all the protection that God gives us, and stand firm against the spiritual forces that oppose God. Healthy competition that I've been talking about should never lead to a lack of love, and it should not lead to harming other people. The Bible teaches that this form of competition will never lead to a lack of love for others. Healthy competition will instill in us to inspire us to work harder and to strive for excellence, but it will never become at the expense of our relationship with other people. Paul puts this very succinctly when he wrote to the church in Philippi, and he said this in chapter 2, verses 3 and 4. Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit, but rather in humility value others above yourself, and not looking at our own interests, but each of you to the interests of other people. Just remember that God has called all of us to fight for His kingdom together. But He has a plan for our lives, and He has a plan for other people. So if we forget this, eventually we're going to trample on the people that God had a plan for, and that's not healthy competition. Healthy competition looks at what we were meant to be, and then also helps us and guides us to help others to what they were meant to be. You know, in Luke chapter 13, Jesus talks about a parable about a fig tree planted in a vineyard. It has a privileged position, and after 3 years, the owner of the vineyard wants to cut down the fig tree, but the caretaker of the fig tree, the vineyard, says, just give me one more chance, and I'll dig around it and fertilise it, and then at the end of the next year, if there's fruit, then that's good. We're like that fig tree. God has a plan for our life, but if God has a plan for me, He has a plan for all my friends that I know. And that's superimposed over the whole of Christianity today. And even the world, because Jesus died for all people. So bear in mind that today, as we engage in positive, healthy competition, that we strive to do what God's purpose has for our life, and try and do our very best to improve the lives of those around us so they can find their purpose and follow God just like we are. I pray that you put this into practice today, and together we can follow God, and this world can see God's love and power in action. You have a good day, and we'll catch you in the next video. Bless you.